Arcade Heroes.
Get ready!
Hey everyone, it's Adam with ArcadeHeroes.com, and in case you come across this video separately from the video that it was originally recorded with, this is continuing on discussion of the business models in the arcade industry, how they stack up against the console industry. And so this was connected to the EVO Japan exA-Arcadia announcements, and so there's a link to that in the description, as well as if it's on YouTube, on the notes up at the top, but that's where this is mainly answering something for exA-Arcadia as far as that discussion goes there. So just find that in the description and enjoy this long talk about the differences in the business models. The big question that I've seen discussed on there on Discord and on X and some other sites is, why is it that exA-Arcadia is focusing on all of these obscure titles? Now, the short answer of that is, well, one, this isn't new. I mean, they've mostly focused on titles that wouldn't be super well known, like a Street Fighter or a Space Invaders or something like that out there. But two is that one thing you have to remember is that the bulk of their target market is in Japan, and that's where they're headquartered. Now, most of the employees at X are actually Americans, but most of them live in Tokyo. And so when you look at all their marketing and stuff, you'll notice that most of it's in Japanese, and that if we look at this map of locations using the Arcade Belgium exA-Arcadia locator, you'll see that a vast majority of them are located across Japan. Now, I'd also add that Arcade Belgium's thing, I don't know when the last time this was updated, because there's a few things on their site that hasn't been updated since 2024, but also this is just based on their own research or somebody reporting into Arcade Belgium as to whether a location has an X or not. As you can see in the West, it's just not as prevalent, but even then I know of at least one location in Maine, an arcade in Maine, that has an EXA. That's not on the list. And there's probably some others that are missing in Japan and in other parts of the world. But still, it's the best list that we've got, so I'm not dunking on it by any means. Just pointing out that there are probably locations that are lacking there. But still, those two main points are the reasons why they would be focusing on stuff like this. And now, one thing that EXA told me is that they were recently testing that Asuka 120% Excellent, which is based on what I would call an obscure fighting game that I believe it showed up on the Sega Saturn, and it had a limited arcade release back in the day. But it's even though I'm pretty decently versed in arcade releases and stuff from various research I've done into the arcade industry and history and all that, I had never heard of it until EXA announced it, and that's been the case with several of the titles that they've done. But these games perform well on the Japanese market. So Asuka 120%, EXA told me that it was their best performing game on test that they had ever seen, and that it was averaging something like 190 plays a day. And it peaked close to 300 plays at the most that it had been played. And in the past, I'd seen numbers not just from EXA, but outside of EXA, showing that Axel City 2 was outperforming Street Fighter 6 Arcade Edition. And so when it comes to the whole idea of, why is it that EXA's coming out with these games that nobody will buy or only collectors will buy? Well, again, you need to remember that they're not just focused on the U.S. market. Now, yes, they do sell into the U.S., and that's one reason why we cover them. It's at Arcade Heroes, I try to cover everything arcade, but I don't spend a whole lot of time on Japanese games that likely won't get any official support outside of Japan, just because the chances of you really seeing them are very, very low. Now that's changed a little bit in recent years, where Round 1 USA has picked up more titles and such that they import in, or they work out a special deal so that they have those as exclusives. But there's not a Round 1 USA near everybody, and Round 1 USA doesn't carry every single game that's ever been released in Japan in modern times either. And so I just consider those limited to Japan releases. But EXA games can sell anywhere, so if any operator out there is interested in one, they can pick one up. But when it comes to the West versus the East, the mentalities of the operators are very different. Within the West, as you probably know if you're familiar with the arcade industry at all, is that they're very focused on redemption games and merchandiser games, crane machines and coin pushers and instant prize merchandisers and such. And the reason why is because those make a lot of money. And from the perspective of, really the numbers show that they consistently make more money than video games do. And then on top of that, if you were to break it down even further, if you compare the performance of one type of video game against another, so like say a driver versus a light gun game versus a joystick game, so like every single fighting game is going to use a joystick and button combo, joystick games consistently underperform other types of arcade games. And I've even seen that with big names. So like me as an arcade operator, operating for 17 years at this point, I've owned a lot of joystick games, but I've owned other types of games. I've owned Super Street Fighter 4 Arcade Edition. I have Minecraft Dungeons Arcade, which is joystick based. And like if I look at Minecraft and I compare it to my top three, like my Minecraft's never been in the top 3 or 5 games in my arcade. My top games are, I should say really quick, I am one of the few exceptions in the Western arcade industry where I don't have any ticket redemption games at all. And so I'm mainly focused on video games and pinball, but I've never seen a joystick game get close, except for the very, very, very brief period, the month and a half, where I had Super Street Fighter 4 Arcade Edition, where it was not available on consoles yet. That's where it made like $2,000 within that short amount of time, and so that was the one exception to the rule. But other than that, what is in my top 3 or 5 or 10 are going to be my driving and light gun games before I get a single joystick game within that realm. And with fighting games, it becomes an even more difficult issue just because of the fact that for the most part, the fighting games are going to be available on consoles with more content and more features and online play and stuff like that, making them more something that's more enticing to players than something that would be exclusive, something that you can't get at home. And I know that there's a lot of people that don't like to hear that, but I'm sorry, it's absolutely true. That's what the numbers play out, and it doesn't matter how much you wish it were different. It doesn't matter what emotions you throw into it. The data is the data, and it says that exclusives outperform non-exclusive. Stuff you can't get at home is what brings people in the doors and what pays the bills versus home ports. And that's why I constantly am not all super gung-ho on the port stuff. I mean, I'm a gamer too, and I have in my collection, I can find arcade ports. Sure, I enjoy them too, and I understand the desire for them there. But if you want the arcade industry to exist, then it has to have stuff that you can't get at home. And sometimes that has to be more than just the controls. And that's one reason why joystick games do underperform their other counterparts in the industries, because it's even tougher to get like a light gun game type experience or a driving experience. I mean, yes, you can get accessories for stuff like that, but it's actually not even as common as it used to be. Like I'd say in the late 90s, early 2000s, it was more common to come across accessories for driving games and light gun games for like the PlayStation 1 and 2 and such compared to today. And so it's usually just gamepad stuff, but the gulf of difference between a gamepad and a joystick or arcade joystick is really not that much. And so that's where most people just don't care. It's like, hey, if I can get this at home, I'll just buy it, I'll play it at home. And so those are the main issues that get in there. I mean, we could dive in further with business models and such, as so there are other things to take into consideration as far as production costs and manufacturing costs and profit margins. And one thing that I would also point out is that profit margins on an arcade game are far higher than they are on a console game. And so it's like you could take you could get 100 sales on an arcade game that could make generate more profit for the company than selling 5,000 home copies. And that's because when it comes to a game console title, say you're paying $60 for that, the developer is not getting all of 100% of that. There's all sorts of hands that get to go into that, including the distribution, or the physical manufacturing costs. Even with digital distribution, there's licensing costs and digital distribution costs and stuff. And so each store has a different percentage that they take, and which has been the subject of lawsuits like between Apple and Epic, where they're fighting over percentages on things of that nature. And of course with other game publishers, they keep trying to find ways to generate more income and revenue from them, which has turned off a lot of gamers. I've seen plenty of people reasonably upset over games starting to cost $80 or $100, and that's because in part that you get these bloated budgets for these AAA titles like Assassin's Creed Shadows and Grand Theft Auto 6, where they're just costing these enormous amounts of money, and they may not, don't know about Grand Theft Auto 6 yet, but from what I've heard is Assassin's Creed has not performed super well. It's definitely not performed on the level that it needs to make the money back. But when it comes to arcade machines, they don't have quite the budgets, but you can again get much more profit out of them. And also, just so you're aware, like Raw Thrills, they spent $4 million on Terminator Salvation. They spent $4 million developing Jurassic Park Arcade. They spent $10 million on developing Godzilla Kaiju Wars VR. And that doesn't include all of their production costs afterwards. Like once the game's finished and they have to manufacture the game cabinet and everything that comes with it, that's going to cost even more money, even more millions of dollars afterwards. Now, obviously, exA-Arcadia is not needing to spend that much money on developing their games, and that's part of their business model. And another reason why they may choose obscure games is the fact that it's far more economical to take an existing game where it has existing code and existing assets and rework those. I mean, yes, there's still a cost to redeveloping assets, redrawing assets into HD and such, and going through and fixing bugs and stuff. So it's obviously not free for them to do that, but it's still more economical than creating a game straight from scratch to be able to release that. And again, they're able to build in good profit margins so that they don't need to sell quite as many cartridges to make up the development costs and to turn a profit. I mean, if EXA wasn't turning a profit, they've been around for 5 years, and they started talking to me 7 years ago, but they launched at the very end of 2019 in Japan, very beginning of 2020 everywhere else. And if they were losing money, I mean, unless they were somehow generating income somewhere else, but or getting a rich like Saudi investor or something like that, like some companies like SNK have, but I've not heard of anything along those lines. Generally speaking, most companies have to generate a profit to stay in business, and so 5 years on, where they managed to do that, it shows that their model is working. And again, where the base of their customers, the foundation of those who are buying most of the games, are located in Japan. and operating the games out there, then that's what benefits them. And of course, there are some Western operators like myself. I've bought probably a dozen EXA games over the past 5 years, and I've been able to do that where I have a few cabinets that I've also invested into and put those out there. And for me as a gamer, that's one reason why I like the system, is because I'm able to offer some actual hardcore games that haven't been dumbed down. Like, that's a frequent criticism of modern arcade gaming, is, oh, these games are really stupid, they're designed just to spit out tickets or something. And so to me, it's like, if you wanted to revitalize the arcade industry and bring gamers back into it, you need more hardcore games like that. Now, again, as I mentioned previously, would I love it if EXA had Street Fighter 6 or Tekken 8 or something along those lines? Yeah, I would. But I've talked with them about this, and the problem with really big names or like even Mortal Kombat is that the licensing fees are sometimes outrageous. I've heard from more than one source that if you wanted to license Mortal Kombat for use in the arcades, the license alone is $1 million. And maybe that's even a little higher now from the last time that I asked, which was, I think, several years ago. But still, if just your licensing costs that much, there's still some other costs you're going to have to bear. After that, you're going to have to charge a much higher rate for the game. And so it's like I mentioned, I've told the story about Super Street Fighter 4 more times than I can count. If you haven't heard that, the long story short is I spent $10,000 on a kit, which didn't even come with a cabinet. I had to figure out my own cabinet solution. And, that was very, very expensive for a game that I couldn't even charge $1 for. And like I said, it made amazing money in a month and a half, but because Capcom's greed and the fighting game community's gatekeeping didn't allow them to keep it exclusive, I got screwed. It's like the console guys get to pay $40 or $60 for a game. I pay $10,000 for it, and because the game wasn't given a reasonable period of exclusivity where I can make my money back and then maybe a little bit of profit to help keep my doors open, I lost $8,000 on the piece of garbage, which didn't even function for very long afterwards. It broke down. I had to send it to Japan, and then it broke again, and then I haven't been able to get it working since, and I just kind of stopped caring because nobody was playing it unless it was 25 cents, and sometimes Street Fighter 2 was making more money than it was. And so, most operators don't want to lose money. I mean, I don't think any reasonable operator wants to lose money on something. And so that's where it's a hard sell for a fighting game, especially one where you're guaranteed that it's going to come out on consoles and such. And like I've also talked about, like Taito was trying to sell Street Fighter 6 Arcade Edition in the U.S., but they were wanting $10,000 for it. Tekken 7 did have a very limited arcade release, but it was something like $15,000, $16,000 for it. And then, of course, all that content became available for the home. And so it's like, put yourself in my shoes. Would you want to spend that sort of money just to get screwed out of it? I mean, not unless you're crazy or unless you're like Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk or whoever, where you already have tons of money and you can eat that cost without thinking about it. But for the rest of us normal people, that's just not feasible. And it's like the way that I keep my doors open isn't by losing money, it's by making money. And so that's where you have to be careful about what you pick. So again, yes, I would love Street Fighter 6, but I'm not going to pay $10,000 for it again. If it was something like $2,000, sure, but not at those insanely high costs. Now, one thing that I do still hope to see coming from EXA in the future, because they've had a relationship with SNK and they've released a couple of SNK games or a few SNK games, is I would love to see something like Metal Slug. I would love to see something like a King of Fighters, like the King of Fighters 98 UM or 2002 UM, or even one of the newer King of Fighters, because King of Fighters does really well for me still. I mean, relatively speaking. It's not in my top 10 or my top 20, but for a game its age, it outperforms Miss Pac-Man sometimes. It certainly outperforms some of the more obscure 80s and 90s games that I have in my arcade. And so if I had a newer version of that or newer remaster of that, that would do fantastic. I'd love it if they were to remaster some older game, like take an older Tekken and remaster it, like do a Tekken 5 HD on EXA. That would be cool. Or a Super Street Fighter HD, which I think was done on the Xbox 360 some years ago. That would probably do really well. Or Soul Calibur 2, like that's coming to the Nintendo Switch 2 online, and I would love something like that for arcades too. That would probably do all right, and it also wouldn't need to cost tens of thousands of dollars either. I understand where EXA has to pick and choose their battles, just like I as an operator have to pick and choose my battles. But those are some of the complexities that go in there. I could probably do another whole video on all the things that are different between home consoles and arcades and why things have to be the way that they are. But because another thing that we could throw in there too is just the number of sales that you can reach within the arcade industry is going to be vastly smaller than what you can reach in the console industry. Like consoles can sell millions of units. That's just not possible in the arcade industry. Like even the best-selling machines of all time, arcade machines of all time, like Space Invaders, Pac-Man, and Miss Pac-Man, each one of those only sold like somewhere under 300,000 or maybe just a little bit over 300,000. But that was back in the peak of like 1981, 82, somewhere around there. But you look at something like Asteroids and Centipede, which were plenty popular, those only sold around 60,000 each. And so these days you can still sell above 10,000 units. So there's games like Golden Tee, Big Buck Hunter, Jurassic Park, Cruise and Blast. All of those have surpassed the 10,000 mark. But, you know, those are kind of exceptions to the rule still. So not everybody's going to be doing that. And so that hopefully gives you some perspective on the arcade industry, and for those that were curious about it. I don't know if that's a satisfactory answer or not, and again, this is just to the best of my knowledge from dealing with EXA and as well as other manufacturers over almost 2 decades now. I've become a bit more involved in seeing the manufacturing process firsthand, like with Allen One, with some of the stuff that I've been doing since they've been actually making cabinets here where I'm at. And so I've been able to visit their factory, been able to talk to them about what the challenges are that they face in manufacturing. And it's really not cheap to build whole cabinets and all that stuff. But again, where you only have maybe a ceiling right now of somewhere around 30 to 40,000 operators across the planet. Now, sometimes they can buy more than one game, and it's just like, you know, with me, with EXA, I'm one operator, but I've bought multiple EXA games, and I have 3 EXA cabinets, you know, that's we're able to buy more, but just the economics of it are always different. So don't apply console or mobile gaming economics to the arcade industry, because it just doesn't work. It's like trying to put puzzle pieces together from 2 different puzzles. You know, it's you might get something here that fits here and there, but for the most part, it's not going to work. But hopefully that covers everything as I've ranted here. Welcome to my thank you for listening to my TED Talk. But that was EVO Japan. Which of these 8 games would you like to see if there was an arcade near you that could house them? What would you go out and play? Or if you're a collector that has some cash to spend, is there anything that you would grab from that? And is there anything of a big name that you would like to see EXA carry? Let me know in the comments below, and we'll catch you on the next video.